right, so this week was that's my dancing music right there. Shut it, Mickey. Hey, who had a fun time last week at the skating party? Kevin, I am so glad to see you walk in here today. This guy wiped out like 6 times, and man, he fell hard. I had to check the floor to make sure it wasn't broken as hard as he was falling down there. No, but I love that he got back up every single time. And I saw a lot of you out there. I had a great time. That was a really, really cool time being able to talk with you all and just skate, hang out, and have some food. So thank you all for coming and being part of that. We are jumping into Easter. I'm giving you a break from Revelation, from the doom and gloom, because we're going to talk about some excitement, some life. And so that's what we're jumping into today is our Easter series. Now, just so you know, this past week, something you can be praying about, the assist team and I, it was me, my wife Katie, and Keith Michael and Jess Michael, we had a boot camp. We had for about 3.5 days where we went to the Baltimore area and we worked on some things about the future of this church, of some planning. So I just want you to kind of have that in your mind and have an understanding and generate some excitement because there are big things coming and we're going to be making some announcements here soon as we get some things in order about where we're going as a church and what we're doing. But what we do know is why we exist. We're a church that exists. What we want to do is we want to bridge that gap between people and God. We want to bridge the gap between people and people. We want to help connect people to each other, connect people to Jesus by our passion, our contagious passion for God, right? And when we do that, what happens when you connect people to God? Their lives are changed forever. And that's what we want to see happen here in this church. Now, along with that, this idea of changing lives and Jesus is the resurrection. And so we're going to start this series called 3 Days and Denials. And we're going to go through Peter's life in the last few days of Jesus' life. And we're going to look at some of the things that happened. You see, we all know Peter. Well, maybe we don't all know Peter. I've never met him, but I've heard of him. We've read a lot about him. You hear things about one of Jesus' disciples who was the most brash, the boldest, the one who would be there for everything. He was always the one that had his foot in his mouth, though, right? Peter was the one who walked on water. Peter was the one who did amazing things. Peter led the charge. When Jesus was about to be arrested and taken to his crucifixion, be taken away, Jesus is the one who Peter's the one who grabbed the sword of one of the soldiers and sliced the ear off of one of the people coming to get Jesus. So this guy is excited and he's bold, but we're going to look at what happened in his life, and we're going to look how he came from a place of denial, a place from complete brokenness to a place of restoration. Because here's the truth. There's a little bit of that in all of us. We all deny Jesus Christ. We all deny God. We're all broken and we all need to be restored. As we get into this, I wanted to kind of tell a story. Maybe I'll ask a couple questions. Anyone ever had a nightmare? A nightmare, okay. If I see anybody jump while we're in service, I know you're sleeping and having nightmares. So I've had nightmares before. There have been things that have terrified me. When I was a kid, there was this terrifying thing to me. I conjured up in my mind this ghost creature that would come into my room at night, and I called her the horseshoe lady because she had horse feet, and she would sneak in the room. It's funny now, but when you're 5 years old, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. Well, so what would you do when you're a kid and you're 5 years old and you're in your bed at night and monsters in the room? Well, you couldn't go to mom's bed, but you would try to. You're too terrified to get out of bed, though, because what happens if you step your foot off the bed? Well, the monsters under the bed are going to grab your feet. So what do? You're in your bed. Yep, this is it. You're in there. I would be in there under the covers like this, and I'd see or I would think that the horseshoe lady was coming to get me, and so I'm like this, and you start like this, and you're like, here, there's the ghost. I think I'm good. I think I'm safe. Nothing can get me because I'm under my blanket. If I can't see the ghost, if I can't see the monster's not there. Let me see, maybe the monster's gone. Not yet. That's what we do. I got to fix my hair. Yes, Jess. That's what we do. We go through life just like the 5-year-old that is terrified of the monsters in the room. And we do this. We grab the blankets in our life, whatever those blankets are, and we put them over our head because we think the blanket is going to protect us from the problem. That's called denial. And honestly, in my case, it's stupidity. How often have I been stupid enough to think that a blanket is going to protect me from the monsters in my room? That's what we do. This morning, I want you to remember something, that the monsters in your room don't go away just because you put a blanket over your head. Where are you getting with this Andrew? What are you talking about? Well, I want us to think about some things as we're going through this series, as we're going through this passage. I want you to turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew 26. We're going to look at Peter, and we're going to look at how he acted as if he had a blanket over his head. He put himself in a state of denial. And we see where it got him. Every one of us. Every one of these things that we put in our life, every one of these ideas that we think that we can overcome, every time that we say that this problem isn't a problem, even though we know it is, we're putting the blanket over our head. We're in denial. So some of the questions we have to ask ourselves, am I in denial about my own goodness? You see, we go through life thinking that we're good enough. Why? Because we set the standard based on the person next to us. I bet there's a part of every single one of us that, if we would admit it, walked in here today and looked at someone and thought, now, you may be basing it on many different things. You may be basing it on appearance. You may be basing it on what you know about their life. You may be basing it on the fact that you've had a good week. But you see, this idea about my own goodness being good enough, my own goodness being the standard, that is a blanket. That's me putting a blanket over my head saying, I don't see what else is happening. As long as I cover my face and act like there's no monsters in the room, I'm good. Am I in denial? Am I in denial about my own abilities? Am I in denial about my own emotions, my own willpower? I'm strong enough to fight that situation. I'm an alcoholic, but I'm strong enough to go into a bar and not get drunk. I'm a gossip, but I'm strong enough to jump on Facebook and Instagram and all the social media and dig up information on people so I can't wait to tell the other person at work about it. You see what I'm talking about? You see this denying these situations, looking at a situation that says, if I put this blanket over my head, then it doesn't exist. That's a problem. You see, and Peter did this in his life. Peter, his problem was not so much just the idea of a blanket, because Peter's blinders were the fact that he had faith. Peter's blinders were in himself, faith in himself. You see, Peter's faith was in his own faith rather than in Jesus Christ. How many of us today say, I can get through life if I just have faith. I can get through this difficult circumstance if I just have faith. We say that a lot, don't we? It's a Christian language, isn't it? How many times have we said that? Oh, just believe, just have faith. What we need to do, we need to go one step further. Have faith in Jesus Christ. Because if our object of our faith is Jesus rather than the faith itself, then we will overcome. We can have success as defined by God, which means standing for Him no matter what, which means trusting in Him no matter what, which means leaning on Him no matter the circumstance. You see, when we put faith in ourselves and in our own abilities, that's putting a blanket over our head saying, I can do it because I'm going to act like these problems out here aren't strong enough to overcome me because I got my blanket of faith. Are you following me? You get what I'm saying? You've got to remove the blanket. You've got to accept what scares you, and you have to trust in Jesus Christ. One of the ways to do that is accept the power of God in your life by putting faith in Jesus. Now, I have to apologize today. My slides are going to be all over the place probably, okay? And there's going to be times I'm going to say something that's going to feel like I repeated it, and I'm going to jump ahead and behind, but that's just, this week was nuts. It was crazy. It's not that I'm not prepared, but this message, it's just hit me in a million different ways. You know how you read a passage and you're like, man, God, quit throwing all this at me because I feel bad today. That's what it feels like with this message, with this passage. Well, I want to read in Matthew chapter 26. I want to read the passage that we're going to get to today. Matthew 26, verse 69. It starts here. It says, "Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. 'You also were with Jesus of Galilee,' she said. But he denied it before them all. 'I don't know what you're talking about,' he said." Verse 71, Matthew 26, 71. He said, "Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him, and said to the people there, 'This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth.' He denied it again with an oath, 'I don't know the man.'" Verse 73, "After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, 'Surely you're one of them. Your accent gives you away.' Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, 'I don't know the man.' Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. 'Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times.' And he went outside and wept bitterly." What is the context of this passage? What is going on? Well, this is Peter after he had met in the upper room with the other disciples. You know the picture, what is it, by Da Vinci or Michelangelo? I don't know what it is. The picture of the Last Supper, and they're all sitting there in a nice, neat line, and they're having their meal with Jesus in the middle. He had already done that. And in this meal, it's the meal where Jesus said, "Hey, this bread is my body. It's going to be broken for you. Drink this cup. This is going to represent my blood of my sacrifice." He says, "Hey guys, I'm going to the cross. I am going to go die." And Peter is doing everything he can. And this whole time, all the way up to that point, Peter keeps telling Jesus, "No, no, 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 I will protect you." He says, "I'm going to save you. Jesus, you don't have to die because you're the hero. You're the conqueror." You see, every time Jesus would say something about what needed to happen that didn't align with Peter and his thought process, Peter would fight it. He would deny it. And ultimately, this denial came out in Matthew chapter 26, verse 31. Where am I in this? Can you guys go to verse 31. I don't know how I got to the end of the... All right, verse 31. Okay, so it says here, so this is the context. So Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says this in verse 31. He says, "Then Jesus told them, 'You will all fall away on account of me.'" And then he gives them an Old Testament prophecy that said this needed to happen. He says, For it is written, 'I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered.'" So God is going to strike Jesus Christ, his son. He's going to crucify him, and then all the sheep of his flock are going to scatter. His disciples will run and hide. And then he says in verse 32, "But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Continue in verse 33. Peter replies, all right, this is Peter. Peter says, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me or deny me 3 times. And Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you." And all the other disciples, they said the same. You see, we can see from this passage here, we can see from these words of Peter, is that his faith was in himself. His faith was in his own faith. His faith was in the fact that he said, "I'm going to be strong enough." Because how many times did he say, "I"? He says, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." I mean, he's throwing his boys under the bus. He says, "God, Jesus, come on. These guys are a bunch of chumps, but I'm Peter. Come on. I walked on water, man." He He says, I'm good. I'm strong. I got this. And Jesus says, nope. This very night, imagine if Jesus had a watch. He's looking at his watch. Actually, I got it on a timer, Peter, in about 2 hours and 29 seconds, you're gonna deny me. It's gonna be bad. Big bold Peter, it's gonna be bad. And he says, you're gonna deny me 3 times. Not just once, 3 times. And Peter says, no. He says, I stake my life on it. I'm strong enough to stick with you, Lord. You see, Peter's faith was in his own faith. And I walked away with this question, is my faith, do you have faith in your faith, or is your faith in him? You see, every time we put faith in ourselves, in our own ability to overcome whatever it is, to overcome our struggles, our addictions, our sin. Yes, this pastor uses the word sin. Sin means I do anything that God says is wrong, which is most things that we do. Any time that I sin, any time that I put faith in myself or my power to overcome sin, I'm putting a blanket over my head and acting like the monsters aren't in the room. Because this blanket isn't going to protect me. This blanket of false faith in myself will not protect me. I have something called a human body with flesh and a fleshly mind. I was born in sin. And because of that, I am prone to sin. The only way out of that desire to sin, the only way out of moving in that direction of wanting to sin is to put my faith in Jesus Christ and what He's done for me. Every single day we have decisions to make. Every single day we have little decisions to make. And they all impact our relationship with God, what we're doing. And so here in this passage, we've got Peter. I read in the beginning the denial of Peter, but I went backwards and we looked at how Peter said, I'm never going to do that. You're never going to get me, Jesus. You're never going to get me to sin. People are never going to get me to sin because I'm strong enough. I can do it. I can stand up in the face of opposition because I'm good. And Jesus said, no, you're not. And so He says, you're going to fall. You're all going to fall away. Well, right here in the middle of this, I want to give you kind of the application, the way to not fall. I don't want to wait to the end. I want to tell you right up front. If you don't want to have your faith, if you don't want to be running around with a blanket of false faith over your head, trying to fight everything that you come up against in this world on your own, then you need to be prepared to fight it. You see, earlier in this passage is the same passage where Jesus took His disciples and they all went out to the Mount of Olives. They went to the Garden of Gethsemane. They went out there, and then Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his 3 amigos. He was like, you guys are the special 3. And Peter's leading the way. He says, I want you to come with me. I'm going to leave the rest at the gate. I want you to come with me. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to pray. I want to pray to my Father and prepare for what's to come because I know that it's going to be a tough road ahead. And I know I can't do it on my own. And so He looks at His disciples. He says, hey, sit here and stand guard. Be ready. And so what's Jesus do? He goes and He starts praying to God. He's like, God, if there's anything that can have me not go through with this crucifixion, if there's anything that can have me not go through with having to bear the weight of all the sin on my own body, please take this cup from me, God. But I'm going to do what you say regardless. Your will, not mine. And so Jesus goes back and He looks at His disciples who He's expecting to be sitting there and watching and preparing and praying because He knows that just as He's got something coming, there is opposition coming their way because they're with Him. And he finds them sleeping and He says, what are you doing? And what's it say there in verse 41? He says, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He says you can want to all you want to stand up to the monsters in the room. You can want to all you want, be able to stand. But the problem is that blanket of your flesh is not going to protect you from anything. You need me. He says, so watch and pray and prepare and be ready. So how do you keep from falling? How do you keep from failing? How do you keep from getting in a situation where you look back at the end of the day and said, I said I wasn't going to do that, but I did. By watching, standing guard, praying, staying in tune with God and the Holy Spirit every second of the day. When you wake up, when you put your head down, think on things of heaven. Think on what is good and pure and right. Ask God, I need you with me today because the truth is the battle belongs to you, not just me. Friends, I'm telling you, I do this a lot. I try to do it in my own power, and I fail. And even what I think is success isn't success if I'm not doing it in Him. See, Peter failed because he failed to remain awake, to watch and pray. He went into the battle and he wasn't ready. So how do we keep from falling? We've got to stay awake. We've got to remain awake. In our own strength, we will fail, but in God's strength, Jesus stood strong. Okay, so at the same time as we're going through this picture of Peter denying Jesus, do you know where he's denying Jesus? Well, let's look at the verse here. It says here, now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard. What courtyard? He was sitting in the courtyard of the high priest Caiaphas. And so when you look at Matthew and you look at Luke and you look at John and you put it together and you understand they're all telling this story of Peter's denial. They're all telling the story. Jesus is on trial with his own people in this moment. And so Peter is in the courtyard of the house, this high priest, and he's looking up and he sees Jesus on trial. And it says he's sitting out in the courtyard. And so he's sitting here and he's kind of around a fire and he's huddling up and he's trying to watch and see what's going on. And it says, and then a servant girl came to him. Jesus is before the high priest, the most powerful person in all of the Israel community. He's in front of the powerful men and all of their buddies, and they're all standing there and they're looking at him and they're saying, you call yourself the King of the Jews. They say, you're a liar, you're a blasphemer, you say you're Son of God. What's wrong with you? And Jesus is just standing there like, God, I'm doing this for you. And I'm doing it for them. And so I'm going to stand tall because I prepared for this. You've prepared me for it. Doesn't mean it's not hard. But I will not fall, I will not fail because I trust in you, God the Father. And so Jesus is up there doing this, and Peter's down here sitting by a fire, like just trying to check it out and see what's going on. And this servant girl, the lowest of the low. This servant girl, the lowest of the low, she comes up to him. She's not only a servant, which is like a slave, like somebody who really isn't anybody except that does things, but she's also a woman, which is in that society, like what you said didn't really matter. And she looks at him and she says, you also were with Jesus of Galilee. And what's Peter do? He denied it. He says, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, this is that little white lie. This is that little situation that we say, it's not really a big deal. You know, he plays dumb. She says, hey, you were one of those guys that was following him around up there. You know, she's just talking to him. And then he's like, hey, who? Jesus who? He's playing dumb and acting like he doesn't even know who she's talking about. He says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who you're talking about. And so he starts in this place of a lie. He denies. You see, this blanket that he had over his head of his own faith and his own ability, all of a sudden, he doesn't realize it, but the blanket is gone. Or, even more so, this is what he's doing. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know the man. I've never heard of him. I'm just here trying to get warm by the fire. I have no idea. How stupid is that? That's what he's doing. He's sitting under the blanket. He's talking. He's relied on his own power, and that's what he's doing. He's in front of people, and he's saying, it says, but he died. He says, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he went out. So he's sitting here in this seat. He's sitting in denial, and he's like, man, I got to get a little bit away from this. And so he gets up out of the chair. He gets up out of the seat, and he walks away, and he moves further away from where Jesus is. And it says he went out to the gateway, and so now he's away. And he says, where another servant girl comes up to him. And this time, this girl says to him, with people to hear, there are other people in the area, they're hearing, and he says, hey, this guy was with Jesus in Nazareth. And he denies it, and he takes an oath. And he says something along the lines of, I swear to God, I do not know the man. So his lie, his first denial was, I really don't know him. To the next thing is he's swearing to God. He's taking an oath that Jesus just got done telling him in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, don't take oaths that you can't keep. Don't lie. Don't make an oath on a lie. And he does it. And he says after a little while, and we find in John in 18 or whatever, it says this is like an hour later. So he's out here in the gateway, and he thinks he's good. He's like, all right, I'm good. I denied it. I'm good to go. It says those standing there went up to him and they said, surely you're one of them. You've been denying it this whole time, but your accent gives you away. You see, Peter was from Galilee. And the way that they talked was a little bit uncivilized, a little bit barbaric, a little bit West Virginia. They were a little bit, you could tell where these guys were from. Jesus had the accent. And he's in Jerusalem. And everybody in Jerusalem knows Jesus because Jesus is like the Beatles. I mean, everybody knows who Jesus is. And Peter's like, I don't even know I've never heard of the Beatles. It's like going to Chicago and saying you don't know who Michael Jordan is. I mean, this is how far along he's got. This is how blinded he's been by sitting in the chair with the blanket over his head. He's saying, look, I don't know what you're talking about. They're like, you sound just like him. You come from the very place he came from. There's no way you don't know this man. And so Peter began to call down curses. And he swore to them. He says, I don't know the man. And this idea of calling down curses, it's something, if the first thing he says is, I don't know him, never heard of him. The second thing he says, I swear to God, I don't know the guy. The third thing he says, let me be damned. This is not your pastor cursing, okay? This is what he's saying. He says, let my life, let my eternity be damned if I'm lying about this thing. I do not know the man. Do you see how far he got? Do you see how far removed he got from his situation? You see, he started in a situation where he thought he was strong enough. He sat there with the blanket over his head. He thought, I can fight these monsters on my own, so I'm not prepared. And he went there, and so the first thing he did was a little bit, I don't know him. And then that I don't know him turned into something a little bit stronger. And he moves out of the fireplace. He moves out of the courtyard, away from Jesus, moving further away from Jesus. And then finally he's about as far away as he can be, but he's still in the vicinity, and he's looking at the guys, and they're looking and they're saying, you're a believer, you're a Christian, you're a Christ follower. And he says, no way. God strike me dead right now if I'm lying. What's it say there as it's underlined? Immediately. He says, immediately a rooster crowed. Okay. If you read the other accounts, I asked you this week, go home, read the cross accounts in the other Gospels on this stuff. You're going to see that Jesus is up there answering questions in the trial, or not answering, because he's like, I don't have to talk to you. I'm your creator. I'm going to trust God. I'm going to go through in the power of God here in this moment. And so Jesus is standing firm, and he's not backing down. And Peter is down here being questioned by little girls and servants and people on the outside, and they're all looking at him. And so Jesus, and then he denies him at the very last second. He says, let God kill me in this moment for eternity if I'm lying about this thing. And then immediately the cock crows, and he looks up, and Jesus is being taken down, and it says that Jesus turned and they met eyes. I get chills thinking about it. Have you ever made a promise, said you weren't going to do something to someone, and then you failed, and right the second you failed, they show up? And you look them in the eye. I don't know what the failure is. You know, we all make promises. I promise myself this week I'm going to put in a full day's work. I'm not going to skimp out on the time card. I'm not going to add extra minutes when I leave early. And the second that you add those extra minutes and you leave at 4:55 and you're not allowed out of there until 5 and you're walking out and there's your boss. Ooh. Well, this is a little worse than that. You see, Peter had spent the last 3.5 years walking around with Jesus. Jesus looks at him in his fishing boat. He says, hey, Peter, follow me. I'm going to have you doing some really important stuff. Fishing for men. Changing people's lives in my name. Come with me, let me teach you. And so he's alongside him for 3 years. And Peter says, I'll be by your side till death do us part. But that lunch with a coworker in the midst of an argument with your wife turned into 2 lunches, to 3 lunches, to 4 lunches. It turned into an affair, and now you're divorced. Because I could do this on my own. I'm strong enough. You see what I'm talking about? Do you see where I'm going? These are the failures that happen. It's looking at your kids saying, I promise I will be there for your game. But then you have a choice. Hey, if I work overtime tonight, we get a little bit more money. And you break the promise. Because in your heart of hearts, in your spirit, you were convinced you were going to keep that promise. But you failed. Why? Because the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Watch and pray lest you give in to temptation. Watch and pray. Now, I just listed out a couple different things. Some things, they seem very terrible, and some things they don't seem as bad, but the truth is they're all a problem that we deal with because we live in a life that we say, I'm going to make a promise because I'm going to put the blanket over my head and act like I can't see the possible things that could happen. I'm going to act like no matter what, I can handle this situation. And the problem is we can't. We can't handle the situation. You see, Peter, he does the thing he says he's not going to do, and immediately in that moment, he locks eyes with Jesus, who he knows just stood up and did what he said he was going to do. And he sees that he's a failure. And he does something. He acknowledges his failure, and he repents of his sin. And this is what we see here. We don't see the rest of this in Matthew, but we do see it in the other Gospels, and we're going to get to some of this stuff later on in the series. But we must acknowledge our failure and repent of our sin because repentance leads to restoration. It says there in verse 75, the cock crowed. Immediately the cock crowed after he'd done this thing. It was like boom, boom, boom. Up, here it is. The lightning came down from heaven. He says, then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. He said, before the rooster crows, you will disown me. You will deny me 3 times. And he went outside and he wept bitterly. He went outside. He had this guilt, this sin. And it broke his heart. It broke his heart that he denied his Lord, his best friend. It broke his heart that he didn't stay with him till death do us part. It broke his heart that he broke the promise. Peter went into this whole situation all the way up until this time. Peter had been doing everything for Jesus, and he'd been saying to him over and over again in the way that he acted, in the way that he lived. He said, Jesus, you need to be saved, and I can do it. He said, I'm Peter. I can save you. But then when the time came, he realized that Peter couldn't even save himself, and the one who he needed to be saved with is Jesus Christ. Isn't that crazy how it flips on its head? He realized there in that moment. He wept bitterly. What was I thinking? I had the blanket over my head. I thought it was all me. I thought I could do it. And the whole time I had it backwards. Jesus is the one that I needed to be dependent on. He went outside and he wept bitterly. And it's really, really interesting, though. Because as we leave this chapter in Matthew, we feel like that's where Peter stays. But Jesus predicted that something different would happen. Jesus predicted earlier on, he said, I'm going to go, can you go back to the slide for me that jumps to Matthew 26, verse 31? It's slide number 7. What's underlined there? He says, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, hey, guess what? Every single one of you is going to run. You're all going to scatter. You're going to run. John runs away naked. I don't know what he's running away naked for, but they grabbed a hold of his cloak or something, and you see it in the book of John. He talks about it. He runs away and he gets his clothes ripped off. And John is the one who really, really Jesus loves, and he loves him too. Peter, he slices the guy's ear off. But then eventually they all scatter. They all run away. They all go away. And Jesus says, all this is going to happen. And he says, but after I have risen, after I'm killed, and after I rise from the dead, after I do what I'm called to do, then I will go ahead of you into Galilee. And that's when restoration will occur. You see, he didn't leave them hopeless in their failure. He said, you're going to fail me, but we're going to get right. Do you see that? So if you're sitting in here today and you're thinking, I'm a failure, I mess up, I screw up all the time, I can't do things right, well, guess what? Jesus says, yeah, it's going to happen. Doesn't make it right, but he says there's a path for restoration. I'm going to go ahead of you. Will you jump to slide 22 for me, please? 2 Corinthians 7:10 says this. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. You see, Peter here in this moment, we know when it says that he went outside and he wept bitterly, that he was in a state of godly grief. He was in a state of grief over his sin. He was in a state of grief over hurting Jesus. He was in a state of grief over his failure. He wasn't in a place where it's like, oh, bummer, I got caught. Now I'm sad that I have to deal with the consequences. You see, that's worldly grief. Worldly grief says, man, now all these bad things are going to happen, and so I'm sad. Godly grief says, God, I know I sinned against you. And it hurts my heart that I hurt you. The cool thing about Peter here, for all of his bravado, boldness, and brashness, is that he failed. Because I believe this failure was the turning point in his life. Don't let your failure define you as a failure. Allow your failure to point you to Jesus Christ. You see, after this is when Peter was superpowered. You see, Jesus died, he rose from the dead, he restored him, And in Acts chapter 2, we see that Peter is filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, and he's preaching to thousands of people. And he's saying, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I tried to do it on my own, but I couldn't, and I needed him. I went through my whole life sitting in a chair with a blanket over my head, refusing to accept the reality that I wasn't good enough, refusing to accept the reality that I wasn't strong enough, refusing to accept the reality that my willpower would not help me get through situations when I knew I would fail. Peter said, but Jesus was strong. Jesus was good. Jesus was great. He's wonderful. So the questions I have for you, I got a couple questions here. What's your blanket? What's your blanket? What are you putting over your head and hiding? Hiding reality with this false strength. What is the fake strength in your life? What is the blanket? Guys, this isn't stopping any monsters. If there really were a monster in my room, this blanket is not going to keep it from getting me. If a grizzly bear comes in my room and tries to kill me, I'm going to put a blanket on, I'm good. This blanket's strong, it's me, I made it. No. But that's what we do. We got to quit with the blanket. We've got to stop with the blanket, because every one of us that has a blanket on our head is sitting in this chair. It said that Peter was sitting outside the courtyard, denying Jesus. He was denying the power of Jesus in his life. He was denying the need for Jesus in his life. Are you sitting in that chair? I'm serious this morning. We're going through this series. We're building up to Easter Sunday. Excitement, talking about that glorious day when the resurrection happened. The problem is, if you're sitting in this chair today denying Jesus with your life, if you're denying that you need Jesus to overcome your sin, if you're denying that you need Jesus for salvation, then resurrection day is not going to be good for you. So are you sitting in this chair? I got to tell you something. This chair may as well be right here. Because we come in every Sunday morning and we think that sitting in this chair sets me up. Sitting in that chair is not good enough. Sitting in this chair isn't good enough. So for those of you that haven't given your life to Christ, no, you can come on up. For those of you that haven't given your life to Christ, you're sitting in that chair. You're unsaved. You need to throw the blanket off and accept the reality that you cannot save yourself. No matter how good you are, no matter how many Bible verses you throw on Facebook and social media, no matter how many nice things you do, no matter how many old ladies that you walk across the street, no matter how good you feel about yourself, at the end of the day, you're not good enough because you're still in the chair denying Jesus. And when you die, if you go into eternity sitting in this chair, Jesus is going to look at you and you're going to say, but I did this, and this. And he's going to say, it's not good enough. Depart from me, I never knew you. He's going to say it's not. So if you're in this room today, stop sitting in the chair. Get up out of the chair and give your life to him. Say, Jesus, I need you because I understand that you're a holy, holy God. And my goodness is like filthy rags compared to you. I could never, ever, ever, ever be enough. Peter was Jesus's like number one. He's the rock. Peter built his church. Jesus built his church on the back of Peter and what he did. He sent a revival. Over 3,000 people got saved in the first day of Pentecost. And what happens? Peter still failed. I'm not Peter. We're not Peter. We're not good enough on our own. We need Jesus. So if you are unsaved, you're sitting in that chair. But how about those of us who've gotten up out of the chair and have followed Jesus for 3 years? We've walked around with him and we've looked at what he's done and we've seen the power that he's given us in our life. And yet at work, you get in that conversation with that friend of yours and they start talking. They start saying, what do you think about gay marriage? They start saying, what do you think about sex outside of marriage? What do you think about premarital sex? What do you think about abortion? And it's in those moments that we're listening and we're talking to them and we go, let me just sit down in this chair. It's not that big a deal to me. Or we sit in silence. You see, that's what we do as saved people, is oftentimes we deny Jesus even though we've seen his power in our life for 3.5 years. Let's not sit in the chair. We got to watch and pray unless we give into that temptation to say no, unless we give into that temptation to say it's okay for a little bit of sin. Maybe we sit in that chair when we meet somebody that we know is sitting in that chair. We know someone needs Jesus Christ and we're afraid to give them the reason for the hope that's in us. Every time we fear, we sit in the chair. So I ask again, are you sitting in the chair? Here's the thing, we don't have to stay seated in the chair. We just need to admit that the battle belongs to the Lord. We need to admit that it belongs to God. We need to admit that God is going to overcome regardless. And so we should just give in to him. Give in to him now. Worship team's going to come up. We're going to sing a song. We're going to sing this song, Battle Belongs to the Lord. And I have a request for you all. Do you know someone sitting in this chair? Do you know someone who is sitting here denying that they need Jesus in their life? Jesus says, watch and pray. Well, how about we put their name down on the chair? I got some markers up here. If you know someone who's sitting in this chair today, will you come write their name and promise to pray for them? I will come out here every day that I'm here in this office for the next 3 weeks, and I will read those names to Jesus, and I will pray for them. And you can pray for them too. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your name. Maybe it's your name on the chair. I will pray for you. I will pray with you. Who's got a friend? I'm going to write my friend down here. There's a guy I know named Chris. I'm going to pray that God will work in his life to bring him out of the chair. Who's next? Everybody stand up with me, please. Do you know someone who's in this chair and needs to be saved? Come write their names down. You don't have to write the last name, but I will pray for them every single week. And they're going to sing The Battle Belongs to the Lord. And we remember as you're writing these names that the battle belongs to Jesus.